We are continuing our series of 2026 NHL Draft-related coverage by diving into a guy who very well could be this year's third overall pick. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about Caleb Malhotra, out of the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL, and soon to be a part of the BU Terriers in the NCAA. Ladies and gentlemen, Caleb Malhotra is the subject of today's video because we're going over some commentary that he made about potentially going over to the Vancouver Canucks at number 3. Now, if you haven't been following the entire story of this season and the Canucks, hey, I don't blame you. They stunk this year, so it was kind of hard to follow it throughout the course of the year. But Vancouver dropped in the draft lottery from 1 all the way to 3. It was the highest likelihood chance that they actually go to this spot, so maybe it's not really all too surprising. But with that said, the Vancouver Canucks will likely not have the opportunity to draft projected first overall pick Gavin McKenna. They may not have the opportunity to draft Ivar Stenberg. That's going to depend on the Sharks. But when it comes to Caleb Malhotra, a guy whose consolidated ranking right now is actually 13th overall, this is a guy who has risen so far up the draft boards that now 13th feels like kind of a joke. There's no way Albert Smits is going over Caleb Malhotra. Ryan Lynn, local guy from Vancouver, Richmond, hey, that's an amazing name. He's not going over Caleb Malhotra. Tynan Lawrence out of Boston University, I don't think he's going over Caleb Malhotra either. But with that said, Caleb Malhotra is arguably, if not definitively, the best center in this year's draft. And the Vancouver Canucks have been linked to him for quite a while now. This is why when we take a look at what Caleb Malhotra said on the potential to be picked by the Canucks at number 3, he said growing up in Vancouver, going back home would be really cool. That's the team I cheered for most of my life. My dad, Manny, being a part of that organization, it'd be interesting. Of course, Caleb Malhotra's father, Manny Malhotra, not only was he a former Vancouver Canuck once upon a time, was a part of the Canucks Stanley Cup run to the finals, maybe not during the entire run itself, but in the finals at least. He played in Vancouver for 3 seasons. Caleb Malhotra was born in 2008, so Manny, he had Caleb when he was still a Blue Jacket, but then by the time he was in Vancouver, that's when Caleb was 3, 4, 5 years old. Now, Manny Malhotra is the coach of the Abbotsford Canucks, so Caleb joining the franchise that his dad is a part of once again. Sounds like that'd be a pretty cool idea. Caleb Malhotra spoke about rising up the draft boards this season. I made a name for myself. I still got a ways to go, but I did exactly what I wanted. And then he spoke about dealing with the pressure. I kind of let it fuel me. Playing bigger games, that's when I play better. Now, that last part is actually pretty true. The guy upped his point production like crazy in the OHL playoffs, 26 points in 15 games. He was such a stud, and all this at being draft eligible too. It's a really good age range for Caleb Malhotra to show off his dominance at the OHL level. June 2008 is the birth date, so he still has an extra year's worth of development over some of the September, October 07 guys, essentially. Malhotra, as a result, will be taking his talents over to BU next season, which I would actually say is a really good move, especially if the Vancouver Canucks end up taking him like they're projected to by a lot of outlets. Because, you know, if the Vancouver Canucks ended up taking a Stenberg or a McKenna or a whomever, if they did that in this year's draft, you know, Francesco Aquilini would be like, hey, get that guy in the lineup right now. We got to be competitive. We got to build up the youth. We got to do all this stuff now. We got to get back in the wild card. Like, it's going to be an immediate shift with all these guys. But for Caleb, it's like, nah, bro, I'm going to the NCAA. I haven't played there yet. I'm not going to the NHL. This all, of course, spoken within the context of him being third overall. There is a chance he could go a little higher. Who really knows? There were conversations saying, hey, if other teams were to get that second overall pick, let's say Chicago, do they go out there and take a Stenberg? Okay, that's probably likely. They want a guy to play with Connor Bedard. If Vancouver gets second overall, do they take Malhotra because they need the center? That's what Jeff Merrick went out there and spoke about, and I believe it was Sakaris and Price sometime 2 weeks ago. And now we have some other scouting reports and prospect talk all on social media that dives into the possibility of Malhotra and where it is that he can go in this draft. Jeff Merrick said a few days ago on the Sheet podcast that he doesn't really think Caleb Malhotra gets past Vancouver. He really doesn't. The prospect Don tweeted this out saying, I could see the Canucks locking onto Malhotra, but if the Sharks take a D-man and Stenberg is on the board, I feel like the Canucks would have to take Stenberg. The Sharks are a huge wildcard now. If the Blackhawks knew that Stenberg would be there at 4, would they still shop the 4th overall pick? Furthermore, Craig Button, Cam Robinson, and Scott Wheeler all have San Jose taking a defenseman and Vancouver going with Malhotra at 3rd. Stenberg would drop to Chicago at number 4. These are all very notable names in the scouting prospect community. And just hearing that Caleb Malhotra's name is going 3rd in a lot of these circles, it does get me wondering, how big is this fire with all this smoke that we're seeing? Generally speaking, we have crazy conversations maybe a month and a half before the actual draft takes place. So the fact that we are now debating Stenberg, a potential 1st overall caliber guy back in January, going 4th, that checks out. Like, it would be a repeat of the Shane Wright situation from a few years ago, where Slavkovsky, Cooley, and Nemec all went 1, 2, 3. Instead of Wright, Caleb Malhotra could be one of the risers in this year's conversation, because Ivar Stenberg is a winger who potentially doesn't have the same filling need with San Jose and Vancouver like Malhotra or a defenseman would. Furthermore, you had some other conversations over here. Craig Button's mock draft has Vancouver going Malhotra at 3rd overall. The fact that Malhotra himself seems pretty content with the idea of coming over to Vancouver, saying that it'd be interesting, it'd be really cool. He grew up in Vancouver, the team he cheered for most of his life. That is obviously pretty high praise. He can't say that specifically about every team out there, especially San Jose or Toronto. But I also do wonder too, right? Like, Manny Malhotra was a part of the Toronto Maple Leafs in a limited capacity. I mean, he was their assistant coach for a while, but he also was in Vancouver's assistant coaching department as well for a few years before that. There are some ties to the Toronto Maple Leafs that you can say Malhotra has, but then again, it's like, are they taking a center 1st overall, or are they just taking Gavin McKenna? I don't know. It's probably going to be McKenna, if not Frank Saravelli and Oliver Ekman-Larsson really getting that Stenberg train going and running. But with that said, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Caleb Malhotra as a potential Vancouver Canuck? And how do you feel about his overall response to the idea? Seems like he wants it. Does it not? I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.